Good morning, and welcome to the Lightcast live analysis of the JOLTS report, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. Today, on November 30th, 2022, I'm your host, Elizabeth Crowfoot, filling in for Chris Laney, and coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Joining me are Senior Labor Economist Layla O'Kane and our Chief Economist, Bloody Tasca. Layla and Bloody, it's so good to see you guys today.
Good morning, Elizabeth. Great to see you.
Good morning, Elizabeth.
Hello. So this is our last JOLTS report of 2022. So there's so much to talk about. Let's jump right in. Layla, I want to begin with you. What are your first impressions from today's report?
Yeah, my first impressions are that, maybe we will have the soft landing we've been hoping for the last few months. So things are kind of going in the right direction, albeit in a small way, right? Openings are down a little bit. Layoffs are up a tiny bit, but not by much. I think we're seeing a tiny bit of cooling in the labor market, which is something that we've been looking for.
Yeah, speaking of soft landing, Bloody, what are Fed officials thinking right now? Is the labor market cooling off enough to warrant smaller interest rate increases?
I think the signal that we're getting is that we are in the right direction. I think everybody is hoping and is expecting the Fed to decrease the increases in the rates. So obviously, we probably expect something like 0.5 rates increase in the next one. I think the bigger question is what will happen after that. But for the moment, essentially, everything is going according to the plan. And so no significant deviation.
Right. So this is an incredibly hard labor market to read, and especially if we don't get a lot of signal, right, it makes it even more difficult. But Layla, since that last JOLTS report that we saw last month, it seems that we've been hearing a lot about tech layoffs. So what is happening with layoffs more broadly in the labor market, and what does this mean for the economy at large?
Yeah, so tech is kind of an interesting one because in the JOLTS report, you can see tech companies show up in sort of professional services and then also in information. And we're seeing a little bit of a different story with each of those. So in information, openings are actually up a little bit, whereas in sort of professional and business services, they're down. And so I think we're also seeing layoffs up a little bit, but and quits down a little bit. And so that's kind of showing some of the effects of these layoffs that we've been hearing about in the media are playing out sort of in these sectors, but they're not up so high that I think we should be concerned or that it shows that the overall labor market is really weakening. That's not the case overall. The numbers for openings across all industries are really, really high still.
Right. And we know that, especially with tech, right, it really represents a small just blip in terms of the overall size of the labor market, especially with these layoffs. And Bloody, as we continue to hear about these recession fears, is it a possibility that layoffs could spill over into other sectors? And if so, which ones do you think that, might be a possibility?
There's always a possibility that this will spill over, but I do want to start with tech. Because again, if we see essentially what has happened, and if we were to draw like some type of correlation, you'd see that the majority of these layoffs happened in not just in tech, but in companies that both were over leveraged and they were growing a lot, but also they were losing a lot of money. And so, for example, Meta, they lay off 11,000 people, but they also were losing, $200 million per year. I think the one main surprise and exception in the past couple of weeks was Amazon. That's sort of the one that everybody started getting worried because they are actually sitting on a lot of money, and so they would be surprised that Amazon was laying off. But Amazon is actually an interesting one because if you look under the hood, like last couple of days, they announced they're going to have $4 billion investment in India in AWS. So what happened in Amazon was that there was actually not really a overall layoff. It was actually a redirection from some sector that was losing money, which is the Alexas of the world, to something actually that is making a lot of money for them, which is AWS. So even in tech, it's pretty nuanced, right? So I don't think it's happening overall. It is happening in tech, but mostly in companies that are losing a lot of money. So will this be affecting the rest of the economy? Probably. Again, the first sectors that will be affected are the ones that are kind of potentially related, as we've said, with interest rates. So mortgage-related companies, construction potentially could be another one. But overall, again, as we said before, I think the sentiment is there that companies will be more conservative. Like if we had 100 openings, we're going to start and reconsider, do we need all 100 of them? And maybe we just need a fewer of them. So I do expect a little bit more conservatism to happen in the economy, but I do not expect major layoffs to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when, companies are making a lot of internal business decisions that are really specific to their, business needs, right? Especially now. And Layla, not to harp on all of this layoffs, right? But this is what we're hearing in the news, and employers are announcing layoffs left and right. But are there sectors where employers are still struggling to fill open positions? So really the opposite problem, right? They still have demand for workers. They can't find the talent. Like where is that happening?
Yeah, so we can talk a little bit more about this, but we're definitely seeing that overall in retail, which is not super surprising, right? We're kind of in that holiday shopping season. And then we're also seeing openings are up in accommodation and food services still. So some of these industries that have been struggling generally for the last few months are continuing to need more workers at rates that they have been seeing for a while. And I think, on that holiday retail kind of trend, we are seeing, again, openings up in retail, but down a little bit in transportation and warehousing. I think that's a little surprising. That could go up in the next month. Since this is based on October, I kind of expect that in November, we'd see an increase in transportation and warehousing as all this holiday shipping stuff ramps up. And, even in our job postings data, we've been seeing that the kind of holiday frenzy starts earlier and earlier every year. And I think retailers this year, especially with high inflation, have been extending sales, sort of really pushing people to, I think, buy earlier. A lot of Black Friday, but Cyber Monday sales were extended, into yesterday, into today for a lot of retailers. And I think they're saying to their employees, let's try to get as many sales as we can now, because as inflation grows, people might become a little bit less likely to spend.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add a little bit context there, I mean, I think, again, we have the tendency to try to go and focus on specific sectors, but I mean, look at the broader picture numbers. We still have 10.4 million openings, and we had 1.4 million layoffs, right? So, the magnitude is significantly large. We still need a lot of people, and we're not firing as many people as we essentially need. And so, like, overall, if you look at the numbers, we need people everywhere. Like, we need in almost every sector. And layoffs are below what they were pre-pandemic. So yes, they are happening, but they are not happening at an alarming rate. So I think it's useful to take one or two steps back and look at the overall economy and the numbers and see that actually things are not that bad.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we're still at historic levels when it comes to openings, and like you mentioned, layoffs are also still relatively low. And making a transition over to the quits rate now, Bloody, it did fall slightly, right, to 2.6%. Layla mentioned this, but that is still above pre-pandemic rate. So again, we're talking about historic lows or near historic, historic highs when it comes to the quits rate, right? So it feels like this red hot labor market where these workers are switching jobs for higher wages and better benefits and signing bonuses, that much of that is still behind us now. But are the data telling us something different? Should we still be concerned about churn in the labor market leading to higher wages and ultimately pushing prices higher? Bloody, that was to you.
I mean, I think it's still happening, but I think right now we are at a transition phase. I think, at least for employees hearing the news, that does affect their behavior. So I do expect the quits rates to be affected more significantly going forward. We are seeing it in some sectors. So, for example, retail has had a significant decrease in the quits rate. So that has been one that has been substantially, decreasing. So, before there were a lot of jobs and people would leave their jobs very easily, but now it's not happening. So I think more and more as we go into not necessarily a recession, but into sort of a more cooling off of the economy, we are going to see quit rates dropping significantly.
I think I just want to add here that it's important to remember that, as you were mentioning, we're at kind of a historically tight labor market, and that hasn't really changed. And so it's not that the labor market cooling is showing a sign of imminent recession or that there's going to be mass layoffs. Then that's what we're seeing in the data. It's more that we're backing off of what was a incredibly tight labor market into something that is a little bit cooler.
Right. And Layla, you had mentioned this whole dynamic with the holiday season starting earlier and earlier every year, and definitely by October, right? So these data do reflect October. So when we look at sectors like durable goods or retail trade or transportation and warehousing, you did mention some of those already, but does that tell us anything about this holiday shopping season, how it could pan out in the end?
I think that as we kind of chatted about, I think that employers are going to continue to, in retail and in transportation, continue to sort of add to those roles and make sure that they have the folks they need in order to match that holiday demand. But I think they're going to be doing that a lot in November. So I bet we'll see even more openings in the next report. But I don't know how much that will carry through to December, right? I think they're trying to get people to shop earlier, trying to get things shipped out earlier, trying to kind of meet the demand earlier before people are feeling the effects of increases in price hikes that they have been seeing, and the influence of inflation, basically.
Right. So, Bloody, the name of the game in this environment of interest rate hikes is really, can we reduce the demand for workers without triggering a large increase in the unemployment rate, right? So is this type of soft landing still within reach for us?
I see no indications to why not. I mean, I think all the data indicate that we are there. I mean, I think we're going to continue. I mean, if we continue in the same pace that we've been so far, essentially, we're probably going to see unemployment rate going higher. We're probably going to hit, at 4.5%, which everybody is expecting. But again, looking at a broader context, looking at pre-pandemic, looking at it historically, that's not significantly high, right? It's significantly lower than it has been before. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think that the bigger fear is if something happens geopolitically. But in terms of the economy, I think the US economy is very strong and probably as strong as it's ever been.
Right. I think those shocks, that are out of our control, geopolitical or a potential strike, right? A rail strike, these are things that could potentially tip us over the edge and really cause us some trouble in the labor market and the economy overall. And, as we start to wrap up this conversation, and, I mentioned that this is the last JOLTS report for 2022. So what are your main takeaways from this report? And to both of you, if you dare to look into your crystal ball for next year, what can we expect in the new year as the labor market continues to adjust to the Fed's interest rate policy? And Layla, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I know Jerome Powell is speaking later today, and I bet that this report has helped him feel good about the policy changes he's already enacted. He can point to this and say, look, the soft landing that I've been striving for is happening in the labor market. And I think that we're going to continue to see that trend. So I think as we kind of go forward, we'll continue to see the labor market softening. And I think that the Fed will also kind of adjust their rate hikes accordingly.
And what are your main takeaways from the report?
My main takeaways from this report are just that we're finally seeing a little bit of cooling. And I think that's a good sign, and it's a reversal from last month.
Great. Bloody, same questions to you, your main takeaways, and then your, looking into your crystal ball.
I think things are going well. I mean, things are going as expected, and this, should give a confidence boost to the Fed that they are doing the right thing. I think they will continue. I think I'm, conservatively optimistic for 23. I think in the first two quarters, we're not going to see very, very large effects. I think that the bigger question is what and if will happen from the second, sort of like third and fourth quarter of 23. I think that is sort of the bigger question mark. I do believe that we will eventually might get into some other session that everybody's feeling, but I do believe, and I hope that it will be mine.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bloody and Layla, for your insights. And to all our viewers, thank you for joining us for this conversation. Check us out again on Friday for the live analysis of the BLS Jobs Report. I'm Elizabeth Crowfoot. Go to lightcast.io to learn more.